Marcus Chun adjusted his Regulation Academy jacket as he walked through the gleaming corridors of the Galactic Culinary Institute. The walls hummed with the soft blue light of energy conduits, and the air carried the sterile scent of recycled atmosphere. Students from dozens of species hurried past him, their chittering, buzzing, and melodic conversations creating a symphony of alien languages. He was the only human in sight. The acceptance letter had arrived 3 months ago, delivered by a confused postal drone that had taken several wrong turns before finding Earth. The Galactic Culinary Institute rarely accepted students from newly discovered worlds, but Marcus's application essay about traditional barbecue techniques had apparently impressed someone in the admissions department. His grandmother's secret rub recipe, translated through 6 different galactic languages, had somehow conveyed enough passion to earn him a spot. Now, standing before the massive doors of Practical Application Lab 7, Marcus wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The doors slid open with a gentle whoosh, revealing a classroom unlike anything he had ever seen. The space stretched upward for at least 50 feet, with cooking stations arranged in concentric circles around a central demonstration area. Each station was equipped with devices that defied easy description, their surfaces covered in glowing buttons, crystalline displays, and what appeared to be small gravitational fields designed to contain various cooking processes. Professor Zilthak stood at the center podium, her 4 arms gesturing gracefully as she addressed the assembled students. She belonged to the Thessarian species, her blue-scaled skin shimmering under the classroom's artificial lighting. 2 of her arms held data tablets, while the other 2 manipulated a holographic display showing molecular structures of various proteins. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Nutritional Synthesis," Professor Zilthak announced, her voice carrying the musical quality typical of her species. "This semester, you will learn to create sustenance that not only nourishes but elevates the consciousness of those who consume it. You will work in teams of 5, each group responsible for feeding a section of the Academy's population for 1 week." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had expected individual projects, maybe some basic cooking challenges. The idea of feeding hundreds of beings from species he had never heard of seemed overwhelming. "Your team assignments are displayed on your personal communicators," Professor Zilthak continued. "You have 2 standard galactic hours to meet with your teammates and submit your meal planning proposals. Remember, you must work within your assigned budget and use only ingredients available in the Academy's central marketplace." Marcus glanced at his communicator, a device that still felt foreign in his hands despite months of practice. The screen showed 4 names alongside species designations he was still learning to pronounce. His teammates included Vexhai, a Krillian whose crystalline exoskeleton allegedly changed color based on emotional state. There was also Thrum, a massive Regalian whose people were known for their strength and surprisingly delicate sensory abilities. The third teammate was Pip, a small, furry Zelanian whose species possessed 3 stomachs and could digest materials that would be toxic to most other life forms. Finally, there was Senna, a tall, graceful Etherian whose people sustained themselves primarily through photosynthesis but maintained cultural traditions around food preparation. As students began clustering around the room, Marcus spotted his teammates gathering near a station equipped with what appeared to be a molecular printer and several devices that hummed with contained energy. He made his way over, noting how conversations quieted as he passed. His human appearance still drew stares, though most were curious rather than hostile. "You must be Marcus," Senna said as he approached. Her voice carried the whispered quality of wind through leaves, and her skin had a subtle green tint that suggested chlorophyll-based metabolism. "We were just discussing the challenge parameters." Vexhai's crystalline form shifted from pale blue to amber as Marcus joined the group. "Your species is unknown to us," they said, their voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "What are human nutritional requirements? What cooking traditions does your people possess?" Marcus felt the weight of their collective gaze. Thrum, who stood nearly 8 feet tall with skin like rough granite, leaned down to examine Marcus more closely. Dear Galleon's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Marcus had learned indicated intense interest. Humans are omnivores, Marcus began, grateful for the basic xenobiology courses he had taken. We could digest both plant and animal proteins. Our cooking traditions vary greatly across our planet, but they generally involve the application of heat to raw ingredients, often combined with various spices and preparation techniques. Pip's whiskers twitched, and their large, dark eyes focused intently on Marcus. Heat application for taste enhancement rather than necessity, they asked in their squeaky voice. How inefficient. Most civilized species moved beyond thermal cooking millennia ago. The comment stung, but Marcus tried not to show it. He had encountered this attitude before. Many galactic species viewed human technology and culture as primitive, though they were usually too polite to say so directly. Perhaps, Marcus said carefully, but thermal cooking can create flavors and textures that molecular synthesis cannot replicate. There are chemical reactions that only occur at specific temperatures, creating compounds that enhance both taste and nutritional value. Senna's expression shifted to something that might have been interest. You speak of chemical transformation rather than mere heating? Exactly. When proteins are exposed to heat, they undergo denaturation and coagulation. Sugars caramelize, creating complex flavor compounds. The Maillard reaction between amino acids and reducing sugars produces hundreds of different aromatic compounds that enhance palatability and can actually improve nutrient absorption in some cases. Marcus noticed that his teammates had gone quiet. Around the room, other groups were engaged in animated discussions, their conversations filling the air with various alien languages and the occasional burst of electronic translation. His group seemed frozen, staring at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Thrum spoke first, their deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. Your species manually controls molecular transformation through thermal manipulation without technological assistance. Well, we have tools, Marcus said, feeling defensive. Ovens, stoves, grills. But, yes, much of our cooking relies on understanding how heat affects different ingredients. Vexai's coloration shifted to deep purple, which Marcus had learned indicated confusion or concern. This seems incredibly dangerous. How do you prevent toxic compound formation? How do you ensure consistent nutritional density? Experience mostly. Recipes passed down through generations. Techniques refined over thousands of years. We taste as we cook, adjusting seasonings and cooking times based on sensory feedback. Pip's whiskers were twitching rapidly now, a sign of agitation. Sensory feedback? You mean you consume the food before it's finished? Small tastes, yes. To check seasoning balance, doneness, that sort of thing. The silence that followed felt heavy. Marcus realized he might have just described something that sounded insane to beings accustomed to precise molecular synthesis and computer-controlled nutritional balance. Professor Zilthak's voice echoed through the classroom. Teams have 1 hour remaining for initial planning. Remember, your proposal must include detailed nutritional analysis, cost projections, and cultural sensitivity assessments. Senna cleared her throat, a sound like leaves rustling. Perhaps we should focus on the assignment parameters. We need to feed approximately 200 beings from 15 different species for 7 days. The Academy Marketplace stocks standard protein cultures, synthesized nutrients, and basic chemical compounds. Thrum nodded, consulting a data tablet that looked comically small in their massive hands. Budget allocation is 500 credits per day. Most teams will likely use automated synthesis systems with flavor enhancement protocols. What if we didn't? Marcus said quietly. For alien faces turned toward him with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. What do you mean? Pip asked, their voice climbing toward a register that suggested panic. Marcus took a deep breath. What if we actually cooked the food? Used thermal preparation methods? I know it sounds primitive, but I think we could create something unique. Something that the other teams won't be able to replicate with their synthesizers. Vexai's coloration cycled rapidly through several different hues. The Academy has regulations about food safety. Using uncontrolled thermal processes could violate dozens of health codes. Not uncontrolled, Marcus said, warming to the idea despite his teammates' obvious skepticism. Carefully managed thermal cooking. I know techniques that can enhance flavors and create textures that synthesis can't match. And if we're careful about nutritional balance, if we do our research on each species' dietary requirements, it would certainly be different, Senna admitted slowly. Innovation is theoretically encouraged in these assignments. Thrum leaned back, their massive frame casting a shadow over the group. Different doesn't mean better. Different could mean disaster. Or it could mean we create something amazing, Marcus said. Look, I know my methods seem primitive to you, but humans have been perfecting these techniques for millennia. We've learned to coax incredible flavors from simple ingredients, to transform tough proteins into tender, delicious meals. Pip's whiskers had stopped twitching. You're suggesting we risk our academic standing on thermal cooking? Marcus looked around at his teammates, seeing doubt and concern in their alien features. He thought about his grandmother's kitchen back on Earth, the way she could transform simple ingredients into meals that brought the family together. The way a properly grilled piece of meat could create flavors that no amount of molecular manipulation had ever replicated in the Academy's dining halls. I'm suggesting we show them what human cooking can really do, he said. Give me a chance to prove that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones. The silence stretched for long moments. Around them, other teams were already inputting data into their planning terminals. Their discussions focused on synthesis protocols and flavor enhancement algorithms. Finally, Senna spoke. If we do this, we'll need to research the dietary requirements of every species we're feeding. We'll need to understand their digestive systems, their cultural food taboos, their nutritional needs down to the molecular level. And we'll need to prove to Professor Zilthak that thermal cooking can meet Academy safety standards, Thrum added. Vexai's coloration had shifted to a pale yellow, which Marcus had learned indicated cautious optimism. The marketplace does stock raw ingredients alongside the synthetic materials. It would be possible theoretically. Pip sighed, a sound like air escaping from a small balloon. This is either going to be the most interesting assignment of our academic careers, or the most spectacular failure. Marcus grinned, feeling a surge of excitement despite the overwhelming challenge ahead. Then, let's make it interesting. As his teammates began pulling up species' dietary profiles on their data tablets, Marcus realized he was about to attempt something no student had probably ever tried at the Galactic Culinary Institute. He was going to introduce the galaxy to real human cooking. The question was whether they would appreciate it or whether he was about to poison half the Academy. The Academy marketplace stretched across 3 levels of the station's commercial district, its vast spaces filled with the soft hum of preservation fields and the gentle chatter of students and faculty browsing the endless aisles. Marcus followed his teammates through the crowds, his eyes constantly moving between the familiar and the utterly alien. Traditional protein cultures hung in glowing suspension chambers, their surfaces rippling with carefully controlled bacterial growth. Nutrient powders from a dozen different worlds sparkled under UV sterilization lights. Synthetic flavor compounds lined entire walls, their complex molecular structures displayed on hovering information panels. But, tucked away in the far corners, almost hidden behind the gleaming displays of modern food technology, Marcus found what he was looking for. There, he said, pointing toward a section that looked almost primitive compared to the rest of the marketplace. Raw ingredients. Senna floated beside him, her feet barely touching the ground as she moved with the ethereal grace of her people. I've never seen anyone shop in that section, she observed. Most students consider raw ingredients to be emergency supplies. The raw ingredients section was dusty and poorly lit, clearly not expecting much traffic. But to Marcus, it looked like treasure. Fresh vegetables from hydroponic farms hung in preservation nets. Actual animal proteins, flash frozen and vacuum sealed, were stacked in cooling units. Spices from across the galaxy sat in sealed containers, their aromatic compounds contained but still somehow promising incredible flavors. Thrum bent down to examine a container of what appeared to be grain-like seeds from their homeworld. I remember these from childhood. They rumbled. My family would prepare them during ceremonial seasons. But that was before I understood nutrition science. What do they taste like? Marcus asked, pulling out his scanner to check the nutritional profile. Like home, Thrum said quietly. But that's not scientific. That's emotion. Emotion is part of eating, Marcus said, making notes on his tablet. Food isn't just fuel. It's culture, memory, connection. The best meals aren't just nutritionally complete, they're emotionally satisfying. Vexhi's crystalline form shifted to a deep orange. But emotional satisfaction is subjective and unquantifiable. How do you ensure consistent results? Marcus grinned. You don't. That's part of the beauty of it. Every meal is a little different, a little unique. The cook has to adapt, to taste, to adjust. It's an art as much as a science. Pip had wandered over to a display of protein samples, their sensitive nose twitching as they analyzed the scents. These smell complex, they admitted. Much more complex than synthesized proteins. There are dozens of aromatic compounds I can't identify. That's because they're still developing, Marcus explained, joining Pip at the protein display. When an ingredient is alive, or recently alive, it continues to change. Enzymes break down proteins, creating new flavor compounds. Bacteria and fungi contribute their own chemical signatures. Synthesis can replicate some of these compounds, but not all of them, and definitely not the way they interact with each other. Senna had found a collection of plant materials from various worlds, her chlorophyll-enhanced biology allowing her to sense things about the vegetables that the others couldn't. These specimens show remarkable chemical diversity, she said. Their cellular structures are incredibly complex compared to synthesized alternatives. Marcus moved through the raw ingredients section like a kid in a candy store, his scanner working overtime as he analyzed proteins, vegetables, grains, and spices from dozens of different worlds. His teammates followed, initially skeptical, but gradually becoming curious as Marcus explained how different ingredients could be combined, how heat would transform them, how traditional techniques could bring out flavors that had never existed in their synthesized forms. Here's what I'm thinking, Marcus said as they gathered around a small seating area near the raw ingredients section. We create a week-long menu that showcases thermal cooking techniques while meeting the nutritional needs of every species we're feeding. But we don't just copy their traditional foods. We create fusion dishes that combine elements from multiple cultures. He pulled out his tablet and began sketching rough menu ideas. Day 1, we do soups. Almost every species has some form of liquid-based nutrition. We can create broths using bones and vegetables slow-cooked to extract maximum nutrients and flavors. Each species gets a version tailored to their digestive requirements, but all made using the same basic technique. Thrum leaned forward, their massive frame dwarfing the small seating area. Slow-cooked means what exactly? Hours of gentle heat, Marcus explained. Low temperatures that break down tough proteins and extract flavors from bones and vegetables. It's a technique humans have used for thousands of years. The result is a liquid that's incredibly rich in both nutrition and taste. Vexhi's coloration shifted to pale blue. Hours? Most synthesis processes take minutes, but they can't replicate the depth of flavor you get from slow extraction, Marcus said. When you simmer bones for 8 hours, you get gelatin, amino acids, minerals, and flavor compounds that simply don't exist in synthesized broths. Pip was frantically taking notes. And you're suggesting we customize each broth for different species requirements? Exactly. Krillians need high mineral content for their exoskeleton maintenance, so we use calcium-rich bones and add mineral-dense vegetables. Zelanian digestion requires pre-broken protein chains, so we cook their broth longer to achieve maximum protein breakdown. Etherian photosynthetic metabolism means they need trace elements that support chlorophyll production, so we add iron-rich leafy vegetables. Senna's eyes widened. You're talking about cooking chemistry at a molecular level, but using thermal processes instead of direct synthesis. Right. And here's the beautiful part, Marcus said, getting excited. When we slow cook these broths, we're not just extracting nutrients. We're creating entirely new flavor compounds through chemical reactions that only happen at specific temperatures over extended time periods. The Maillard reaction creates savory, meaty flavors. Caramelization of natural sugars adds depth and complexity. Protein denaturation changes texture in ways that make nutrients more bioavailable. His teammates were staring at him with expressions that range from fascination to terror. You're describing controlled chemical reactions using nothing but heat and time, Thrum said slowly. And experience, Marcus added. The ability to taste and adjust, to recognize when reactions are progressing correctly, to balance flavors in real time. This is either brilliant or insane, Pip muttered. Marcus spent the next hour walking his teammates through his proposed menu. Day 2 would feature roasted proteins, where dry heat would create crispy exteriors while keeping interiors tender and moist. Day 3 would showcase stewed dishes, where liquid and solid ingredients cooked together to create complex flavor interactions. Day 4 would introduce grilled foods, where direct high heat would create distinctive char flavors while sealing in juices. Day 5 is when we get really ambitious, Marcus said. Fermented foods. Fermented? Senna asked, her voice carrying a note of alarm. Controlled bacterial fermentation to create flavors and nutrients that don't exist in the original ingredients, Marcus explained. Humans have been using fermentation for millennia. Bread, cheese, pickled vegetables, fermented sauces. The bacterial action creates probiotics that aid digestion, breaks down complex proteins into more digestible forms, and produces flavor compounds that are impossible to replicate through synthesis. Vexai's crystalline form was now cycling rapidly through different colors. You want to deliberately introduce bacteria into the food? Beneficial bacteria, Marcus said. Controlled fermentation processes that have been refined over thousands of years. The results are not only safe, but actually healthier than non-fermented alternatives. Thrum shook their massive head. This keeps getting more complex. Slow cooking, roasting, grilling, and now bacterial fermentation. How do you control all these variables? Practice, Marcus said simply. Experience. Understanding how different techniques affect different ingredients. It's knowledge that gets passed down from cook to cook, generation to generation. And day 6 and 7? Pip asked weakly. Day 6 we do baked goods, using heat to transform starches and proteins into entirely new textures. Bread that's crispy outside and soft inside. Pastries with complex layered structures. Day 7, we create a feast that combines all the techniques we've demonstrated throughout the week. The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, other students were efficiently gathering synthesized ingredients and pre-programmed flavor cartridges. Marcus realized he was proposing something that probably violated every food safety protocol the Academy had ever established. The budget, Senna said finally. Raw ingredients cost significantly more than synthesized alternatives. Marcus had been dreading this part. We'll need to be creative. Buy less expensive cuts of meat that become tender through slow cooking. Use vegetables that are past their peak appearance, but still nutritionally sound. Make our own flavor compounds instead of buying pre-made ones. And the time? Thrum asked. If cooking processes take hours instead of minutes, how do we prepare meals for 200 beings? Marcus grinned. We build a kitchen that can handle large-scale thermal cooking. Multiple cooking stations running simultaneously. Prep work done in advance. It's all about organization and timing. Aki chin, Vexai repeated slowly. You're talking about building an actual thermal cooking facility. The Academy has workshop spaces available to students for projects, Marcus said. I checked the regulations. As long as we meet safety requirements and get approval from the facilities department, we can set up temporary cooking equipment. Pip's whiskers were twitching again. You want to build a primitive cooking facility in the middle of the most advanced culinary institute in the galaxy? I want to show them what human cooking can really accomplish, Marcus said. I want to prove that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones. I want to create food that doesn't just nourish their bodies, but feeds their souls. His teammates looked at each other, engaging in silent communication through body language and subtle color changes that Marcus was still learning to read. Finally, Senna spoke for the group. If we do this, she said slowly, we're going to need help. Research, planning, equipment acquisition, safety protocol development. This isn't just a cooking assignment anymore. This is a complete reimagining of food preparation methodology. And if we fail, Thrum added grimly, we'll probably be expelled from the academy for food safety violations. Marcus looked around at his teammates, seeing doubt and fear, but also something else. Curiosity, excitement. The kind of expression people get when they're about to attempt something that's never been done before. So we don't fail, he said simply. We're going to create the most amazing meals the Galactic Culinary Institute has ever seen. We're going to show them what happens when you combine human cooking techniques with the best ingredients from across the galaxy. Vexai's coloration shifted to bright gold. You really think thermal cooking can compete with advanced synthesis techniques? Marcus thought about his grandmother's barbecue, about the way a perfectly grilled piece of meat could bring people together around a table, about the satisfaction of creating something delicious with your own hands, the way flavors developed through patience and skill rather than molecular programming. I don't think it can compete, he said. I think it can revolutionize the way the galaxy thinks about food. The Academy Workshop Division occupied an entire level of the station, its cavernous spaces filled with the controlled chaos of student projects. Engineering students tested prototype Starship components in zero-gravity chambers. Artists from a Melody homeworld sculpted with solidified sound waves. Biochemistry students grew crystalline formations that pulsed with their own internal light. And in the far corner of Workshop Bay 7, Marcus Chun was building something that looked like it belonged in a museum of primitive technology. Hand me that thermal regulator, Marcus called out, his head buried inside what would eventually become an industrial-scale oven. Around him, his teammates worked with varying degrees of enthusiasm and confusion. Senna floated nearby, consulting architectural diagrams on her tablet while directing the installation of ventilation systems. Her people's understanding of airflow dynamics was proving invaluable for managing heat and smoke distribution. The atmosphere processing unit is functioning correctly, she reported. We should be able to maintain optimal air quality even during high-temperature operations. Thrum was assembling what Marcus had described as a smoker, though the concept remained largely mysterious to the Ergalian. Their massive hands, surprisingly delicate despite their size, worked with precision to weld metal components according to Marcus's sketches. Explain again why we need to expose food to particulate matter from combusted organic materials, Thrum rumbled. It's not just particulate matter, Marcus said, emerging from the oven assembly covered in grease and looking happier than his teammates had ever seen him. When wood burns at controlled temperatures, it produces aromatic compounds that penetrate the food. Different woods create different flavors. Applewood gives a mild, sweet smoke. Hickory is strong and bacon-like. Oak provides a medium flavor that works with almost any protein. Vexai's crystalline form had been shifting through confused purple hues all morning. You're describing controlled combustion as a flavoring technique. This seems incredibly dangerous. Only if you don't know what you're doing, Marcus said cheerfully. Humans have been smoking meat for thousands of years. It's actually one of our oldest food preservation methods. The smoke contains antimicrobial compounds that help preserve the food while adding flavor. Pip was working on what Marcus had called a prep station, though it looked more like an elaborate cutting and chopping area to the small Zilanian. I still don't understand why we need to manually reduce ingredients to smaller pieces. Molecular disassemblers are much more precise. Because the way you cut something affects how it cooks, Marcus explained, checking the calibration on a temperature probe. The size and shape of cuts determine cooking time, texture, and how flavors develop. A rough chop gives you different results than precision dicing. Hand cutting creates irregular surfaces that interact with heat differently than perfect geometric shapes. Irregularity as a feature rather than a flaw, Sen mused. Your species has a fascinating relationship with controlled randomness. The workshop bay was beginning to smell like something unprecedented in the Academy's history. The combination of heated metal, organic combustion materials, and raw ingredients created an aroma that drew curious stares from other students. Several had stopped their own projects to observe the strange construction taking place in the corner. Status report. Came a familiar musical voice from behind them. Marcus turned to see Professor Zilthak approaching, her four arms carrying various monitoring devices. Her expression was unreadable, though Marcus had learned that Thessarian facial features were subtle compared to human expressions. Professor, Marcus said, quickly wiping his hands on a towel. We're on schedule for the equipment installation. Safety systems are all functioning correctly, and we've completed the atmospheric management setup. Professor Zilthak moved through their improvised kitchen with the fluid grace of her species, her trained eye taking in every detail. She paused at the smoking unit, examining Thrum's precision welding work. Control combustion for flavor enhancement, she said slowly. I've read historical references to such techniques, but I've never seen them implemented. It's a traditional human method, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. We've adapted it for the multi-species nutritional requirements of our assignment. One of Professor Zilthak's arms manipulated a scanning device that analyzed the air quality around the smoking unit. Your atmosphere controls are impressive. No toxic compound detection. Clean combustion with optimal aromatic compound production. She made notes on her tablet. What temperature ranges are you planning to use? Low and slow for most applications, Marcus said, relaxing slightly. 225 to 275 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods. We'll use higher temperatures for searing and browning, but the majority of cooking will be at relatively low heat levels to ensure even cooking and optimal flavor development. Professor Zilthak moved to examine their prep stations, where Pip was arranging cutting implements that looked primitive compared to the molecular tools used elsewhere in the Academy. Manual ingredient preparation. Are you concerned about consistency? We're embracing variability as a feature, Senna interjected. Marcus has explained that small differences in cutting technique create textural variety that enhances the eating experience. And sanitation protocols? Professor Zilthak asked. Marcus had been dreading this question, but he was prepared. Full sterilization of all surfaces between ingredients. Temperature monitoring to ensure pathogen elimination. Multiple hand-washing stations with antimicrobial soap. Food-safe surface treatments on all equipment. Thrum looked up from their welding work. Marcus has taught us traditional human food safety practices. They're surprisingly comprehensive for a low-technology approach. Professor Zilthak's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. Low-technology approaches often develop robust safety protocols precisely because they lack sophisticated monitoring systems. Compensation through experience and redundancy. She spent another 20 minutes examining their setup, testing temperature controls, checking ventilation systems, and reviewing their safety protocols. Marcus found himself answering increasingly technical questions about heat distribution, chemical reactions, and the science behind traditional cooking methods. Your proposal, Professor Zilthak said finally, consulting her main tablet, suggests feeding approximately 200 beings from 15 species using exclusively thermal cooking techniques. You're aware that no student has ever attempted anything similar. We're aware, Marcus said, but we believe thermal cooking can create nutritional and flavor profiles that synthesis cannot replicate. Demonstrate, Professor Zilthak said simply. Marcus felt his heart skip. Demonstrate. Prepare a sample dish. Something that showcases your thermal techniques while meeting multi-species nutritional requirements. Marcus looked around at his teammates, seeing expressions ranging from panic to determination. Their kitchen wasn't completely finished, but the basic systems were functional. They had enough raw ingredients for a demonstration, and Marcus had been mentally preparing simple dishes all week. Soup, Marcus said after a moment's thought. A bone broth with vegetables. It'll showcase slow extraction techniques while providing nutrition that works for most of our target species. Professor Zilthak settled onto a nearby stool with the air of someone prepared to observe for an extended period. Proceed. Marcus moved to their ingredient storage, his teammates clustering around as he gathered materials. Bones from 3 different species of food animals, chosen for their complementary mineral profiles. Vegetables from 5 different worlds, selected for their flavor contributions and nutritional density. Herbs and spices that would enhance rather than overwhelm the delicate balance he was trying to achieve. First step is building the foundation, Marcus said, his voice taking on the confident tone he used when explaining techniques he truly understood. We roast the bones at high temperature to develop flavor compounds through the Maillard reaction. He arranged the bones on metal racks and slid them into their newly constructed oven. The smell that emerged as the bones began to brown was unlike anything his teammates had ever experienced. Rich, savory, complex. Even Pip, whose species was primarily herbivorous, found themselves drawn to the aroma. The browning creates hundreds of flavor compounds that don't exist in raw bones, Marcus explained as he prepared vegetables. Amino acids react with natural sugars to create savory notes that will form the base of our broth. While the bones roasted, Marcus demonstrated knife techniques that made his teammates nervous. His blade work was fast and confident, reducing vegetables to uniform pieces with practiced efficiency. Size matters for cooking time, he said as he worked. Everything needs to finish at the same time, so ingredients that take longer to cook get cut smaller. Senna watched his knife work with fascination. The irregularity creates different surface areas, which means different rates of chemical interaction with the cooking liquid. Exactly. Some pieces will break down completely, thickening the broth. Others will hold their shape, providing textural variety. When the bones were perfectly browned, Marcus transferred them to their largest cooking vessel and covered them with water. He added the vegetables in carefully timed stages, explaining how different ingredients needed different cooking times to reach optimal flavor development. Now we wait, he said, adjusting the heat to maintain a gentle simmer. Slow extraction, 8 to 12 hours for maximum nutrient and flavor development. Professor Zilthak consulted her chronometer. 8 hours. For full development, yes. But we should have a good sample in about 2 hours. The basic flavors will be established, and we can test the nutritional profile. The waiting period gave Marcus time to explain the science behind what they were doing. He talked about collagen breakdown, about how slow cooking converted tough connective tissues into silky gelatin. He described the extraction of minerals from bones, the way long cooking times broke down cell walls in vegetables to release nutrients that would otherwise pass through digestive systems unchanged. Temperature control is critical, Marcus said, adjusting their heat source. Too hot, and the proteins will coagulate into tough, unpalatable forms. Too cool, and extraction doesn't occur efficiently. This is knowledge that gets passed down through generations of cooks. Vexai had been taking detailed notes throughout the process. You're describing empirical knowledge gained through iterative experimentation over extended time periods. Trial and error, yes, but also intuition. Learning to recognize the sounds of proper simmering, the way steam should smell, the visual cues that tell you when something is progressing correctly. After 2 hours, Marcus carefully tasted the developing broth. His teammates watched nervously as he considered the flavor, making small adjustments with additional seasonings. Here, he said, offering small samples to each of his teammates and Professor Zilthak. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Even species with wildly different taste preferences found themselves responding to the rich, complex flavors that had developed through slow cooking. The broth was simultaneously familiar and exotic, comforting and exciting. Professor Zilthak took several more sips, her expression thoughtful. The flavor complexity is remarkable. I'm detecting compounds that don't appear in any synthesis database. Because they're created through the cooking process, Marcus said. They don't exist until heat and time transform the original ingredients. Thrum had finished their entire sample and was looking hopefully at the cooking vessel. This is unlike anything I've experienced. It tastes like nourishment itself. It tastes like home, Pip said quietly, echoing Thrum's earlier comment about the ceremonial grains. Professor Zilthak stood, gathering her monitoring equipment. Your technique shows promise. However, scaling this approach to feed 200 beings will present significant challenges. Time management, quality consistency, safety monitoring. Are you prepared for the complexity of large-scale thermal cooking? Marcus looked around at his teammates, seeing determination replacing the doubt that had characterized their first few days together. We're ready, he said. We're going to show the Academy what real cooking can accomplish. Professor Zilthak paused at the edge of their workspace. I'll look forward to your results. Just remember, innovation is admired at this Academy, but so is successful execution. Don't let ambition exceed capability. As her footsteps faded, Marcus turned back to their improvised kitchen. In 3 days, they would begin serving meals to 200 of the galaxy's most sophisticated palates. They had a technique that worked, but they needed to perfect it. Well, Vexhai said, their crystalline form shifting to determined amber. I suppose we should start cooking. The first day of service began at dawn, though dawn on a space station was merely a subtle shift in the artificial lighting that simulated planetary cycles. Marcus had barely slept, his mind racing through cooking times and ingredient preparations. He arrived at Workshop Bay 7 to find his teammates already assembled, their expressions mixing determination with barely contained panic. Status report. Marcus said, pulling on his regulation food service apron over his human clothes. Senna consulted her tablet, her movements more rapid than her usual ethereal grace. Broth preparation is proceeding on schedule. 6 different variations to accommodate species-specific nutritional requirements. The Krillian version has achieved optimal mineral density. The Zelanian preparation shows proper protein breakdown. The Etherian variant contains required trace elements. Thrum was tending multiple cooking vessels simultaneously, their massive frame moving with surprising precision between stations. Vegetable preparation is complete. Root vegetables from 4 worlds, properly sized for uniform cooking. Leafy additions are ready for final stage incorporation. Pip's whiskers twitched with nervous energy as they organized serving equipment. Distribution protocols are established. Temperature maintenance systems are functional. Portion control calculations are complete for all target species. Vexhai's crystalline form have been cycling through anxious yellow hues all morning. The serving hall is prepared. Tables arranged according to species compatibility. Dietary restriction notifications are posted. Emergency medical protocols are in place in case of adverse reactions. Marcus took a deep breath, surveying their operation. 6 large cooking vessels maintained perfect simmer temperatures. Prep stations organized with military precision. Serving equipment sterilized and ready. It looked like a real kitchen, not the molecular synthesis labs that characterize the rest of the Academy. Time to first service? Marcus asked. 2 hours, Senna replied. The breakfast period begins when second shift students complete their morning classes. Marcus nodded, checking the consistency of their broths. The overnight cooking had transformed simple ingredients into liquid perfection. Rich, savory, complex flavors that carried the essence of bones and vegetables while providing complete nutritional profiles for 15 different species. Remember, Marcus said, gathering his teammates in a quick huddle, confidence is key. We know our food is good. We know it's safe. We know it's nutritious. If anyone questions our methods, we explain the science. If they seem skeptical, we let the food speak for itself. The first students began arriving 15 minutes before the official service period, drawn by aromas that had been wafting through the ventilation systems all morning. Marcus watched through the service window as beings from across the galaxy entered the dining hall, their expressions ranging from curiosity to confusion. "It smells like," one Etherean student said to another, their whispered voice carrying in the quiet hall. "Like cooking," her companion replied. "Actual sermel cooking." "I thought it was just a historical curiosity." "Places everyone," Marcus said quietly. "Let's show them what human cooking can do." The official service period began with a gentle chime that signaled breakfast throughout the academy. Marcus's team took their positions behind the serving line, ladles ready, confidence carefully maintained despite the butterflies in everyone's stomachs. The first customer was a Thessarian student named Keltar, whose blue-scaled features showed polite curiosity as they approached the serving station. "I understand you're using thermal preparation methods," they said in the musical voice typical of their species. "That's correct," Marcus replied, ladling a portion of Thessarian-optimized broth into a temperature-controlled bowl. Slow-cooked bone broth with vegetables, prepared specifically for Thessarian nutritional requirements. Keltar accepted the bowl with 2 of their 4 hands, bringing it close to inhale the aroma. Their expression shifted to something like surprise. "The scent profile is quite complex, much more complex than synthesized alternatives." "That's because the flavor compound are created during the cooking process," Senna explained from beside Marcus. "Chemical reactions that only occur at specific temperatures over extended time periods." Marcus watched nervously as Keltar took their first taste. The Thessarian's expression went through several subtle changes that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. Then, slowly, a smile spread across their features. "This is remarkable," Keltar said. "It's like nourishment with personality. I can taste individual ingredients, but they've been transformed into something entirely new." Word spread quickly through the serving line. Students who had approached with casual curiosity began showing genuine interest as they overheard Keltar's comments. The pace of service increased as more beings decided to try the thermal-cooked option instead of visiting the traditional synthesis stations. "Next," Pip called out cheerfully, their nervousness transforming into enthusiasm as positive reactions accumulated. A group of Regalian students approached together, their massive frames requiring special serving equipment. Thrum personally handled their service, explaining the preparation process in the deep, rumbling tones of their shared language. Marcus watched as understanding dawned on the Regalian students' faces, followed by something that looked like excitement. "You use traditional thermal extraction," one of them said in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Like the old ceremonies from our homeworld, before we learned proper nutrition science. We studied your cultural food traditions," Thrum explained, ladling generous portions into reinforced bowls. "Traditional techniques, but applied with modern nutritional understanding." Marcus felt his confidence growing as the serving line moved smoothly. Every student who tried their broth reacted with some form of positive surprise. Some were subtle, merely nodding appreciation before moving to fine seating. Others were more dramatic, calling their friends over to try the thermal cooking experiment. But the real test came when Professor Zilthak entered the dining hall, accompanied by several other faculty members. "Academic evaluation team," Vexai whispered, their crystalline form shifting to pale colors that indicated alarm. Marcus straightened his shoulders. "Remember, we know our food is good. Let it speak for itself." The faculty group approached their station with the measured interest of professional evaluators. Professor Zilthak's 3 colleagues represented different species and different areas of expertise. Marcus recognized Professor Veltar, a Krillian nutritionist whose crystalline exoskeleton gleamed under the dining hall lights. Beside them floated Professor Nimue, an Etherean whose specialization in cross-species dietary analysis was legendary at the Academy. The third evaluator was Professor Gorthake, an Ergalian whose expertise in large-scale food production had shaped Academy policies for decades. "Demonstrate your preparation methodology," Professor Zilthak said without preamble. Marcus launched into his explanation, describing the slow extraction process while Senna detailed the chemical transformations occurring during thermal cooking. Thrum explained their scaling methodology for large volume preparation, while Pip covered the nutritional analysis that ensured species-specific requirements were met. Vexi presented their safety monitoring protocols and quality consistency measures. The faculty members listened with the intense attention of experts evaluating something genuinely novel. They asked technical questions about temperature control, nutritional density, safety protocols, and cost analysis. Marcus found himself drawing on everything he had learned about interspecies nutrition while explaining techniques that were second nature to human cooking. Sample preparation. Professor Veltar requested, extending their serving dish. Marcus carefully ladled the Kryllian-specific broth, noting how the mineral-rich preparation created subtle color variations compared to other species versions. Professor Veltar's crystalline features made their expressions difficult to read, but Marcus noticed that they took several slow, thoughtful tastes before making notes on their evaluation tablet. Each faculty member received their species-specific preparation, and Marcus watched nervously as they conducted what was clearly a detailed sensory and nutritional analysis. The dining hall had grown quiet around them as students and staff recognized that something significant was happening at the thermal cooking station. Professor Nimue spoke first, their whispered voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. The nutritional profile exceeds synthesis standards for bioavailable minerals and protein density. The flavor complexity suggests chemical transformations that aren't replicated in standard food preparation protocols. Professor Gorthe nodded their massive head slowly. Scaling potential appears viable. Resource efficiency is competitive with synthesis alternatives when preparation time is distributed across multiple cooking cycles. Professor Veltar's crystalline form shifted through several color phases before settling on pale blue. The mineral integration is remarkable. I'm detecting chelated compounds that should improve absorption rates across multiple species types. But it was Professor Zilthak who provided the decisive evaluation. This represents genuine innovation in applied nutrition science, she announced, her musical voice carrying to every corner of the dining hall. Thermal cooking techniques applied with rigorous scientific methodology and cross-species nutritional understanding. The dining hall erupted into spontaneous applause. Students from dozens of species showed their appreciation in ways ranging from clapping to harmonic humming to the Kryllian practice of creating crystalline resonance patterns with their exoskeletons. Marcus felt a wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm his composure. Months of doubt, weeks of preparation, and days of intense work had culminated in this moment of recognition. But, more than that, he had proven that human cooking techniques could hold their own in the galaxy's most advanced culinary institution. What's the plan for the remainder of the week? Professor Zilthak asked as the applause died down. Marcus grinned, feeling more confident than he had since arriving at the academy. Day 2 is roasted proteins. Day 3 is stewed combinations. Day 4 features grilled preparations with controlled combustion flavoring. Day 5 introduces fermented elements. Fermented elements? Professor Veltar asked, their crystalline features shifting to colors that suggested intense interest. Controlled bacterial fermentation to create probiotics and flavor compounds that don't exist in the original ingredients, Senna explained. Traditional human techniques adapted for multi-species applications. Professor Gorthe's massive frame shifted in what Marcus had learned was the Ergalian equivalent of a double take. Deliberate bacterial cultivation for flavor enhancement. With rigorous safety monitoring, Thrum added quickly. We've researched traditional fermentation protocols and adapted them for Academy health standards. The faculty members exchanged glances that conveyed entire conversations through subtle body language. Finally, Professor Zilthak spoke for the group. We'll be monitoring your progress closely, she said. What you've accomplished today suggests potential for genuine advancement in galactic nutrition science. Don't let success make you overconfident. As the faculty group moved away, Marcus turned back to the serving line where students were still arriving, drawn by word-of-mouth reports about the thermal cooking experiment. His teammates were handling service with growing confidence, their initial nervousness replaced by the satisfaction of seeing their hard work appreciated. "How many servings so far?" Marcus asked Pip, who was tracking distribution numbers. 237. Pip replied with barely contained excitement. "We've exceeded our target demographic and are serving students who weren't originally assigned to our group." Marcus looked around the dining hall, seeing students from across the galaxy enjoying soup made using techniques his grandmother would have recognized. Traditional human cooking methods, refined through scientific understanding and adapted for interspecies nutrition. Day 1 success. Vexi observed, their crystalline form now glowing with satisfied golden hues. Day 1, Marcus agreed. 4 more days to prove that thermal cooking isn't just novelty, that it's actually better. But as he watched students savoring their carefully prepared broths, Marcus felt confident that they were going to accomplish exactly that. Human cooking was about to revolutionize the galaxy's understanding of food. By day 5, Workshop Bay 7 had been transformed from a simple student project space into something resembling the heart of a space station. The air hummed with controlled activity as Marcus and his teammates orchestrated what had become the most complex food preparation operation in the Academy's history. The fermentation project had taken on a life of its own. Temperature holding steady at 98.6 degrees, Senna reported from her monitoring station, where dozens of fermentation vessels bubbled with carefully controlled bacterial cultures. The Thessarian batch is showing optimal probiotic development. The Ergalian preparation has achieved the protein breakdown levels we calculated. Marcus moved between fermentation stations with the confidence of someone who had found his calling. 5 days of successful service had transformed him from a nervous human student into something approaching a celebrity chef. Students from across the academy had begun timing their meal periods to coincide with his team's service hours. Krillian kimchi is ready for final tasting, Thrum announced from their station, where traditional human fermentation techniques had been adapted to create a mineral-rich fermented vegetable dish specifically designed for crystalline exoskeleton maintenance. Marcus approached the Krillian preparation with the careful respect he had learned to show for fermented foods. The bacterial cultures they had used were approved Academy probiotics, but the fermentation process itself was pure human tradition adapted for alien biology. The results smelled unlike anything the galaxy had experienced. Complex, Marcus said after tasting. Tangy, umami-rich, with mineral notes that should complement Krillian dietary requirements perfectly. The bacterial action has broken down the vegetable proteins exactly as calculated. Pip was managing what had become a small production line for fermented grain products. The Zelanian sourdough culture is active and stable. 24-hour fermentation cycle has produced optimal digestibility markers for their triple stomach system. Vexi was coordinating between multiple monitoring systems, their crystalline form cycling through colors that indicated intense focus. Quality control readings are all within optimal ranges. No pathogenic bacterial development detected. Probiotic populations are stable and healthy. The last 5 days have been a whirlwind of success beyond Marcus's wildest expectations. Each day's menu had built upon the previous day's achievements, creating a progression that showcased the depth and complexity of thermal cooking techniques. Day 2's roasted proteins had introduced the Academy to the Maillard reaction applied to alien biology. Marcus had demonstrated how controlled high-heat searing could create flavor compounds that enhance both taste and nutritional bioavailability. The dining hall had filled with aromas that students described as primal and essential, scents that triggered ancestral memories of cooking fires across a dozen different worlds. Day 3's stewed combinations had shown how different ingredients could transform each other through slow, moist cooking. Marcus had created fusion dishes that combined proteins and vegetables from multiple homeworlds, creating entirely new flavor profiles that somehow felt familiar to every species that tried them. Day 4's grilled preparations had been the most dramatic success yet. The controlled combustion flavoring from Marcus's smoking setup had created what Professor Zilthak described as olfactory experiences that transcend species barriers. Students had lined up for hours to experience food that had been touched by actual fire, a cooking method most galactic species had abandoned millennia ago. But Day 5 was their masterpiece. Final preparations for lunch service. Marcus called out, checking the timing on their various fermented products. Remember, fermented foods are about balance. Tangy, but not acidic. Complex, but not overwhelming. Probiotic benefits without compromising palatability. The fermentation menu represented the culmination of everything they had learned about interspecies nutrition combined with traditional human techniques that dated back thousands of years. Each dish had been specifically designed to provide probiotic benefits while delivering flavors that would appeal to alien palates. For the Thessarians, they had created a fermented fruit preparation that enhanced their already efficient digestive systems while providing flavors that complemented their musical culture's preference for harmonic taste combinations. The Ergalian fermented grain porridge was designed to support their massive metabolisms while incorporating traditional flavors from their homeworld's ceremonial foods. Krillian fermented vegetables provided mineral supplementation for exoskeleton maintenance while introducing umami flavors that their species had never experienced. Zelanian fermented proteins were specifically formulated for their unique three-stomach digestive process, pre-breaking complex proteins while maintaining nutritional density. Etherian fermented root vegetables supported their photosynthetic metabolism with trace minerals while providing earthy flavors that resonated with their plant-based sensibilities. Incoming, Pip announced as the first students began arriving for lunch service. And it looks like we have observers. Marcus looked through the service window to see not just hungry students, but representatives from the Academy Board of Directors. The success of their thermal cooking experiment had apparently reached the highest levels of Academy administration. Director Korthan, Senna whispered, recognizing the distinctive form of a high-ranking Ergalian administrator. And Director Velthes from the Thessarian Cultural Exchange Program. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but he forced himself to maintain the confidence that had carried them through 5 days of successful service. Same approach, he told his teammates. Let the food speak for itself. The lunch service began with their usual efficiency, but Marcus could feel the weight of administrative attention. Every move was being observed and evaluated. The future of thermal cooking at the Academy might depend on how well they executed this final demonstration. The first students to try their fermented offerings reacted with the kind of surprise that had become familiar over the past week. But the fermented foods created an even more dramatic response than previous days' offerings. "This is alive," one Thessarian student said in wonder, examining their fermented fruit preparation. "I can taste the bacterial activity. It's like eating music." A group of Krillian students had gathered around their kimchi station, their crystalline forms shifting through color patterns that indicated intense excitement. "The mineral absorption is immediate," one of them reported to their classmates. "I can feel my exoskeleton integrating the nutrients in real time." But the most dramatic reaction came from their Ergalian students trying their fermented grain porridge. Marcus watched as a massive student named Gorthtel took their first taste, then went completely still for several seconds. "This tastes like home," Gorthtel said finally, their deep voice carrying emotion that made nearby students stop their conversations. "Like the ceremonial foods my grandmother prepared when I was young, before we learned that such methods were primitive." The comment sparked a wave of similar recognition throughout the dining hall. Students from multiple species began talking about food memories, about traditional preparations from their home worlds that had been abandoned in favor of scientific nutrition. Director Korthan approached the serving line with the measured dignity of high-ranking administration. Marcus straightened his shoulders and prepared to explain their methodology once again. "Human," Director Korthan said simply, their massive frame dwarfing Marcus even more dramatically than Thrum did. "Your thermal cooking techniques have generated considerable discussion among the faculty." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, ladling a portion of her galleon fermented grain porridge with careful precision. Director Korthan accepted the serving and took a thoughtful taste. Their expression went through several subtle changes that Marcus couldn't interpret. Then, slowly, the Ergalian director's features shifted into what Marcus had learned was their species' equivalent of smile. "This tastes like wisdom," Director Korthan said quietly. "Like knowledge that has been tested by time, rather than theories that exist only in laboratories." Director Velthis approached next, her Thessarian grace making her movement seem like a carefully choreographed dance. "The fermentation process you've demonstrated represents genuine innovation in applied nutrition science," she said, accepting her portion of fermented fruit preparation. "But more than that, it represents cultural bridge building. You've taken techniques from your homeworld and adapted them to serve the broader galactic community." "That was always the goal," Marcus said, "to show that traditional techniques can enhance rather than replace scientific understanding." "You've accomplished far more than that," Director Velthis continued after tasting her fermented fruit. "You've reminded us that food is about more than nutrition. It's about connection, culture, and the kind of satisfaction that can't be quantified in molecular analysis." The lunch service continued for 2 hours, with students returning for second and third servings of fermented preparations. Marcus and his teammates worked with the smooth efficiency of a team that had found perfect synchronization. As the service period wound down, Professor Zilthak appeared at the serving window with a group of academy faculty that Marcus recognized as department heads and senior researchers. "Final evaluation," she announced. "Please present your week's accomplishments for official review." Marcus gathered his teammates for what felt like the most important presentation of his life. For the next 30 minutes, they walked the evaluation committee through their methodology, their innovations, their nutritional analysis, and their safety protocols. But the real evaluation had already taken place in the dining hall, where students from across the galaxy had discovered that food could be more than fuel. That cooking could be an art form that enhanced both nutrition and culture. "Recommendation," Professor Zilthak said finally, consulting with her colleagues through rapid interspecies communication that Marcus couldn't follow. The faculty group huddled briefly, their discussion conducted in the kind of academic shorthand that transcended language barriers. Finally, Professor Zilthak turned back to address Marcus and his team. "The Academy Board of Directors has asked me to inform you that thermal cooking methodology will be added to the Academy's standard curriculum beginning next semester," she announced. "Furthermore, Workshop Bay 7 will be permanently converted to a thermal cooking laboratory, with Marcus Chun serving as the primary instructor for traditional cooking techniques." The dining hall, which had grown quiet during the evaluation, erupted into the kind of celebration that transcended species barriers. Students who had discovered the joy of real cooking over the past week showed their appreciation through applause, harmonic humming, crystalline resonance, and a dozen other species-specific expressions of approval. Marcus felt tears threatening to overwhelm his composure. He had come to the Galactic Culinary Institute as a primitive human with outdated techniques. He was leaving as the instructor who had revolutionized galactic nutrition science by proving that sometimes the old ways really were better. "There is one condition," Director Korthan added, approaching through the celebrating crowd. "You must document your techniques thoroughly. Create training materials that will allow instructors from multiple species to understand and teach thermal cooking methods." And Director Velthis added with what Marcus had learned was Thessarian amusement. "You must develop a recipe database that preserves traditional cooking knowledge from across the galaxy. Your techniques have reminded us that every species has wisdom worth preserving." Marcus looked around at his teammates, seeing expressions of joy and accomplishment that transcended their species' differences. Senna's ethereal grace, Thrum's solid reliability, Pip's nervous energy, and Vexhi's analytical precision had combined with his own human stubbornness to create something genuinely revolutionary. "We accept," Marcus said, speaking for the team that had become his found family. "But we do this together. Thermal cooking isn't just a human technique anymore. It's a galactic technique that incorporates the best traditions from every species. As the celebration continued around them, Marcus realized that he had accomplished something his grandmother would have been proud of. He had taken her simple barbecue techniques and used them to bring the galaxy together around the universal experience of sharing a good meal. The class had been tasked with cooking. Marcus had built a fire pit and fed the whole academy. But more than that, he had reminded the galaxy that food was about more than nutrition. It was about culture, connection, and the kind of satisfaction that could only come from creating something beautiful with your own hands. The revolution would be delicious.